10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Good luck, studio.
Oh, it's that time again. Paul Chandler's gonna start this whole thing he does. It's called the Shylock Podcast. It's probably gonna start any minute now. Anyway, I think you'll enjoy it. Okay, sit back and relax.
Oh, it's the Shylock Podcast.
All I wanted was a pie, and then I hatched out of an egg.
Okay, bring the mic over. He's ready to record.
It's the quiet ones you've got to watch, you know.
Is it metaphorical? Is it deep? Is it deep?
Good boy. He's not all that shy, is right.
Blimey, Governor. It's the Shy Life Podcast.
Excellent.
562, 692, 500, 562, 562.
Hello. Hello and welcome to yet another episode of the Shy Life Podcast with me, Paul the Shy Yeti. How are you doing? I'm all right. So, what's going on this episode? Well, we've got Nick back again. Hello. Hi, Nick. Hello. And we're going to be talking about discussing some random words again. We haven't done that for a while, so we thought we'd do it again because we recorded some last year that have only just got out, so it's kind of reminded me that actually I had some good feedback, so I think it's time to do another one. So yes, let's run that theme music, and when we come back we'll have some random words for you.
Okay, we are recording.
Darling, it's the Shy Life Podcast.
Yes, but it's positive things on the highlights, the Shylock.
You won't find a cast of characters like this everywhere.
Hello, Paul.
I'll go anywhere for a potato.
Delicious.
Hello, captors. How are you?
You quite like a big pound, don't you, Paul?
Go Shy Yeti.
Oh, I hope he hasn't found out my secret. Do you think he has?
If you thought that was bad, just listen to this.
Oh, I can't wait for it to begin.
It's the Shy Life Podcast.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I am strangely drawn to Yeti Uncle John's ankles as well.
But has the Shy Life Podcast slowed down? I don't think so.
It's all gooey and easy and yum.
Has anyone seen my hot sausage?
So Nick, before we get started with the random words, you've been digitising more lost and newly refound episodes, but we did a whole episode about that, so we don't need to talk too much.
No,
but
that's okay.
you're over. We're recording at my parents', and we're
always a pleasure to be here.
Yeah.
And this is the sort of permanent home of all of Sutton Park, and I've putting back. Or reuniting the tapes with the other ones. I have actually located 3 more episodes. So everything from up to 99 is completely in the can, and just three episodes from 99 and 3 episodes from 2000, which might amount to anything as small as 2 tapes, and that's it. Basically, we are home and dry. Every single episode of Sutton Park digitalised. Also, there's when Sutton Park was sort of in its twilight, you were working on a great number of projects, some film ones, and I think you were kind of testing the form a bit and seeing, trying, sort of branching out. And we found a few more, including Hack, which was something you do with Harry.
Yeah.
And one thing I was delighted to find was the. Because I was in Skeptic, which you did, and I've been wondering what happened to that. We did a whole lot in my parents' loft, and we have actually discovered that tape now. So I was very pleased to see that.
Harry was very good, because when we did Hack, I think we filmed it down in Brighton. So it was Harry and I used to go down to Brighton on occasion back in those days, and I just think, but all my friends sort of knew what the deal was, hanging out with me, really. Yeah. Most people would say, I'm going down to Brighton for a nice relaxing weekend, and I might do nothing. Whereas, we'd be going down to Brighton, and we'd be planning to go out to you go down somewhere like that, you might want to go out. You're kind of there for the evening, for the nightlife, the clubs and the pubs. But you've got a gap in the early part of the day. So that's when we used to do the filming, and it was something a quite cheap thing to do when we were away somewhere.
Also, Beaches 2000, you've discovered a lot of America material recorded in America, which is nice, and including the dear old Twin Towers just before they exploded. But also, I've brought with me, because whilst now the Sutton Park search is coming to an end, I'm kind of making good some of the earlier recordings, and now we've got a slightly more efficient way of doing it. And things like old project, like Time Slip, which you did with Danny, and so little bits like that. And also one of my an early cut of one of my films, Rosie Lens, which had a lot of material. I think there was material missing from various points, and I'm although the DVD's long since been done, it's been nice to have maybe another copy of the original cut, because I don't know whether, because Andrew Candish, the director, did a cut and I did a cut, and there's material that there's a whole tape that was accidentally thrown out by its director, so there's a lot of material that's kind of it's just nice to have another copy.
Well, along the way we found quite a lot of things we didn't even know existed, whether it be on audio tape or videotape.
Well, audio is just as exciting, really. When you discover.
One of the things I remember we found that I didn't remember at all was an earlier version of that Time Shift I did with Danny, but with my brother, almost the identical plot line. But it was only on audio, and it was just on a 90-minute tape or 60-minute tape, in the same location over in the woods, where we were supposed to have woken up, and it was some awful event had occurred, and we were kind of trying to. It wasn't exactly the same thing, but it was definitely what had inspired it, because it was the same year as well, just earlier the same year.
No, I love discovering things, and I love being able to update them and get them shared with people. Well, I was also idly looking for the first Beaches, the original Beaches tape, which was done in '91. I can't find a copy here, so I'm just wondering if there's, for some reason, there might be one. I don't
know how my brother copes. He spent all his childhood being made to act in my stuff. For the last 30 years or whatever, he's barely done any acting unless he's encountered me. How does he cope being a normal person?
Yeah, I know. I don't know. But the thing is, equally, I wish I've got a few there's the pop songs I've got with singing with my sister, but I would love to have had more material. Acting, or because we always used to do little plays and things like that, but it was more it was in the 70s, and we didn't really have unless we thought to sort of switch the tape recorder on, we didn't, but it was, it was fun. I cherish what I've got in terms of those recordings.
Some people just enjoy being normal, I think, unfortunately.
Well, I
can't imagine anything worse myself.
The older I get, more sort of panic-stricken I get that time is running out, and you've got. It's nice to have records of that. I also all this sort of I've got recordings of parties and things I went to. I'm kind of although it probably doesn't mean much to anybody else, but. It's useful, I'd love it. One day, if I was to say to somebody, I've got clips of a party, and oh right, can I have a copy? Of course you can. Yes, I'd love to.
I was saying to somebody only recently, it's nice having friends, but I can't help but prioritise the friends who do creative things, because that's an extra bond you have.
Exactly.
And it's not just meeting up for coffee and catching up and then go. It's something that's lasting and can be listened to. I try and get everybody into my projects in some way.
I like doing things. I like doing creative things. I like kind of doing something that will kind of, as with these, kind of take it forward. Whereas, you know, I that's why whenever I try and get a Shy Life contribution from my sister for, you know, once a year, because it's a lovely way of preserving us all.
and it also, it's not just on a bit of digital tape somewhere in the bottom of the computer. It's actually being used and put out somewhere. It's actually
put out there. It's on the cloud and everything.
with music and and properly edited. And it's not just something that's been done for no real reason. There was a reason.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is, I mean, you know, some people take a lot of persuading to do these things. I jump at the chance because
some of the most fascinating people I know have told me they didn't want to do podcasting because they've got nothing to say, and I know just from seeing what they get up to on their Facebook pages that they have far more exciting social lives than I do, and yet they don't think of themselves. And equally so, some of the most boring people I've ever heard talk are famous people, because they might be in films and stuff, but their actual social lives aren't actually particularly exciting. I think after you've been to the 100th party with a load of celebrities, it's probably no different than going for a party with anybody, really.
No,
I think
exactly. You know, just
I think
conversation's probably the same. You know.
Yeah, I think it's a shame. I have tried to get people on who refuse to believe that they have anything to say, but I know that they do. So, anyway, we should get on with our first random word. I'm not sure if this is a good one to start with, but it was when I logged onto the site. It was the first one that came up. And our first random word is snuggle.
Snuggle. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I think when I thought of when I thought of snuggle, I thought of like teddy bears and how I've always sort of liked teddy bears and soft toys, and I still have them to this day, and to me, a teddy bear or some such is almost second only to a pet, in that, you know, it provides a sort of a comfort, and it's not like a pillow where you can cuddle a pillow, but you know, in my sillier moments, I've had silly conversations with bears and soft toys, whatever you want to call them, and
all in the name of art.
All in the name of art, but sometimes I've said this to Harry recently, that sometimes I have conversations with the characters from the podcast, and almost use it as a form of therapy. And he was quite fascinated, because he thought it was a really interesting idea that you might talk to, you're basically talking to yourself, but you're talking to yourself and with different characters.
I do that when I'm on my own, especially on Wednesdays when Ali's not so much characters, but I imagine I'm being interviewed about sort of the acting I've done, the writing I've done. And I just natter away to myself as if I'm being interviewed. But yeah, it's I don't mind. There's no one here. I don't care.
Yeah, well, it's all a form of, you know, giving yourself comfort or almost companionship when you haven't got anybody to, you know.
Although I must admit, I do like. I do like my Wednesdays on my own, because Ali works on a Wednesday, but on Wednesday's my day off from work, and I do like having that time on my own, I must admit.
Of course, when I stay at your house, there's a big gorilla and a big dog that I can snuggle with.
I think it's Snuggles, wasn't it? Yeah.
Snuggle.
Right.
Yeah.
Two things come to mind. One is Dr. Snuggles, the cartoon series, of which Ali and I have a copy on DVD. It was a cartoon series from the Netherlands about this sort of eccentric inventor who's got these animal friends and invents these wonderfully wacky creations. Douglas Adams actually wrote for it.
I do remember it. But
I remember it being on because I was, although I was probably a little bit too old for it when it came on, but I kind of watched it anyway, and I remember the theme music. When rewatching it on DVD, when Ali got box set, they are really rather good. There's a lot of inventive, fun stuff that is kind of, as you would say, kid old. And especially with the Douglas Adams one, there's a very clever ideas which kind of cross into his imagination. So yeah, Dr. Snuggles, more pertinent to the actual Snuggly bit. Now this might gross some people out, but it's the way it was back then. In the late 60s, early 70s, when I was still in nappies. In those days, you didn't really have disposable nappies. I don't know when they came in, but you had your nappy, and it was cleaned, and it was I think they're still knocking around somewhere, but Burco boilers, which is like a metal tub which put with boiling water in it, and you would boil nappies and clean them. And when the nappy, I think there was a couple of things where the nappy got just too old and was retired, or more likely actually grew out of nappies. A few of them lived on, and one of them at least, it's extraordinary to think about it, became my kind of cuddle, snuggle kind of.
Is it
I don't know whether I called it a cuddly or a snuggly or something, but it's something I used to take to bed as a comfort.
Is it Linus in Peanuts?
That's right, absolutely. Linus with all the flies and everything, and he always used to have this cuddle blanket, and I had this cuddle, retired nappy, which was, obviously he'd been boiled within an inch of his life. It wasn't a remote piece of unpleasantness on it, but and long handlings. It smelled gorgeous. But no, I used to, for several, I don't know how many years, but I do remember having this thing that that I used to, I don't know what I did with it. Did I hold it? It was, because I was quite, there was things on telly that used to disturb me, some from the Hinchcliffe years and things like that. And I had this comfort blanket, for want of a better word. It wasn't really a blanket, but just a little square of white. But yes, that's what I think of when I think of Snuggles. That, and I like snuggling on my chaise longue these days, or snuggling up to Ali on the sofa on a Saturday night watching a film.
I'm just looking at our next. We're going to go for multiple random words, and you can pick. I was just
multiple choice,
because you can pick nouns and verbs and. Pick some adjectives to see what. So pick one of these, or more than one if you want. Pretty, groovy, unusual, holistic, or special. Pretty, groovy, unusual, holistic, or special. Definitely not doing holistic. I'm not even sure where to start with that one.
No.
Well, I'll pick. You think?
Yeah.
I think. I think groovy reminds me of the '60s, and I was my fascination with the '60s when I was a child in the '80s. I was very. I think I almost. So I sort of got over it now, but I think for a while it was that later part of the 60s that was the groovy part, the sort of Summer of Love, like 67.
That's right, yeah.
That kind of interested me more when things started to get a bit more.
Not these people dancing in suits with terribly 50s carryover in the early part.
Yeah, because at the start the Beatles all looked identical, but then as you go on, that they all start to have their own individual. Sort of
That's right.
styles.
Say like, for example, the Doctor Who story, the War Machines, which is 66. Even the troublemaking thugs in the nightclub there, terribly well presented.
Yeah, I remember years ago, and it is years ago, bringing up the subject that in a Doctor Who story, is it the Three Doctors? Joe quotes
a Beatles song.
A Beatles song.
And we were all together, go, go, ka-chow. I think it's from the Walrus.
Yeah, that's right. And I wasn't... And also, I think at the time I was like, oh, why is she talking about a song that... Well, the thing is, those Doctor Who stories, even though they were made when they were in the early 70s, there's always that theory were they actually set later than they were made, and I wasn't sure why. I mean, it's a ridiculous concern to have, considering I like the Beatles. For there to be a character quoting the Beatles, you'd think if it was set in the 70s, she'd be quoting, I don't know, Roxy Music or Bowie or
I never entirely bought into that thing. The six. I mean, it was something the production team very much kept to themselves. But there's telltale signs that it wasn't quite as it seemed. Because I mean, there's a scene in 1971 where somebody asked for change in shillings, which kind of sets it pre-decimal.
Well, a lot of these things, because even to the people who make the show, it's just a show they're making, and they've got to make it that not every aspect of continuity is necessarily adhered to, or it's contradicted. When you get, you don't have somebody necessarily with a show Bible going, you can't say that because that contradicts what we say. I mean, sometimes those sorts of things give you ideas for how. Okay, I guess I could see how that could be a mistake. So I'll turn it into something that was deliberate, and I'll explain why we did it, even though at the time we didn't realise we were doing it. And sometimes mistakes can generate new ideas.
Absolutely. I think I'm going to go for special. Obviously, one thinks of special friends, whatever, but I think there's, I suppose the first thing that comes to mind is specials, TV programmes, that usually around Christmas, that they do a special, or they come back for a series of specials. And with my own series, The Magnet Editor, when we tried to wrap it up about 4 times, and I certainly, when we finished it in 79, I became friends with Joe Bunsell, my writing partner, and he had sufficient interest in it to make me reconsider. And I came back with 2 specials, and then I thought, oh, sod it, we'll just carry on. And with the specials, of course, the main specials I know are the Doctor Who ones. I've never really there's very few Doctor Who's actual specials that I like all that much, because I don't know, they either try too hard with the Christmas thing, or there's been a few there's been a couple I've liked, but on the whole,
some series that I like may have a special Christmas episode, but like mostly Bergerac, the series I like set in the Channel Islands, they had Christmas episodes, but they were very rarely set at Christmas. They were just an excuse to have a longer episode.
That's right.
You didn't or maybe I suppose also sometimes it depends on how much earlier, or whether you're doing a filming block, whether you're doing your Christmas special at the end of a filming block, and it might be September sort of thing.
I think particularly with frankly, all the showrunners, they try too hard with the Christmas thing. They always try to make it snow, even if it's just fallout from a spaceship or something like that. Or whereas I think they ought to do what, say, like you've just said about Bergerac. It would have been better if they'd just done an extra length story and not sort of, because inevitably they shoot them in the summer, and there's one particular one, The Runaway Bride, where it's absolutely ridiculous. It's boiling hot, and there's no way it's remotely convincing as
a lot of their Christmas episodes have been done in studio with special effects to make it look Although that's an example where they did. I mean, maybe they learnt from. Okay, if we're going to do Christmas episodes, we need to do it in a studio where we can control what the background is. I think with Bergerac, because largely it was done on location, they couldn't really hide. They had to kind of work with whenever it was they filmed those episodes. You didn't really do much in studio.
No, because of the location. I think one of the most interesting specials I've ever seen is from about 40 years ago with Grange Hill, which for overseas viewers and listeners was a children's series set in a school, a modern comprehensive. Although they say modern, presumably it was still modern when they finished it. But it ran for many, many years, and in the early days there was. I think it was about 1981, which was been about 3 years into it. They ran a competition. I think it was it Blue Peter or somebody ran a competition to write an episode, a special, and the guy that won the competition and wrote the episode was in it, and it revolved around the school disco. And Tucker Jenkins, who was the main sort of lead in it, had to team up with his sort of school-time enemy and kind of prevent these people from ruining the disco. It was actually a really good episode. Yeah.
My friend Milo, and a friend of comedy as well, he's been watching early Grange Hill on BitBox recently, and I was quite impressed because when he mentioned it, I thought, because he's younger than us, I thought, he'd probably be watching episodes from the 90s. He said, no, I've gone back to the beginning. And I said, it makes you quite proud, because sometimes I thought I might look a bit dated, but it's difficult to know. I mean, we like that sort of thing, or we like seeing things up when before we can almost remember. But some people are very much they're only interested in like anything before they were born kind of effectively doesn't exist sometimes. You get the feeling anyway.
It's really nice to hear. There's a few Doctor Who fans I'm online with, and much younger than us, and they love all eras, which is nice. But no, specials, they can be a bit of a mixed bag, but. If it's a comedy show and they're doing a special, the Christmas special, and they're always quite fun. But if they try too hard to do Christmas, I think that's probably where it falls down. But
I've got another set. These ones are nouns. What are the? See what you think of one of these words. Reputation, player, organisation, historian, or bedroom.
Ooh. Bedroom, I think there's too many saucy. Not suitable for the family listening of this podcast.
I was with bedroom. I was thinking of like being at my parents. How even though I sleep in the room we're recording in, which used to be the spare bedroom, the bedroom next door was my bedroom as a child, although at some point I think Graham had it as well after I'd gone to university. But there's still bookcases and things that have been on those shelves since when I did have that room.
Is there any reason why you don't sleep in there? Or?
Well, partly the bed in that room was almost too hard. The bed in this room is almost too soft, so I feel like Goldilocks, except I don't get the porridge. I don't really know why I ended up in here. But the desk in the other room is full of bits and pieces, whereas the desk in here I can actually use. It's because it's mostly empty. But a historian just makes me think of the people I've known who have been very into history, and my friend Robin, who was in Sutton Park, he did history at Oxford, but then that leads me on to thinking of the times I did filming in Oxford because of him. So it's sort of like the word triggers it, but then you kind of have got a couple more jumps on from because he went to Magdalen College. In the first year he lived outside of the college, but in the second and third year, I think both years, he had rooms in the college, which were quite modern considering it was an old college. But because we were inside the college, we were able to record in gardens and things that were only really student gardens. We were able to do a fight sequence at the top of the tower, the Magdalen College Tower, which only people who had the key, i.e. only students, and a bit in the same way as when I used to work at the college, I was able to get access to the park that only people who had the key could go to. So it's quite nice when, of course, the other person I think of when I think of historian is Lisa, because she is our resident Charlotte podcast historian. She knows a lot about history, although I don't think I really even realised she had that interest until more recently.
No, I didn't. I knew she. She once took me around what was the war when Sharp, the series Sharp, was it?
Yeah.
The Civil.
I'm not.
No, not Civil War.
I'm not sure. I
can't remember what the war was now, but she took me around a whole museum about it. I have to say I'm drawn to the historian too, because history is one of those things where it kind of eluded me, because I wanted to be I quite fancied, when I left school I quite fancied the idea of being a TV archivist, like in the because of like in the sense of a librarian, because I knew I was excited about news and missing episodes and things like that, and I liked cataloguing things. But somebody said, "Oh, you need a degree for that." And I thought, "Oh no, I can't be asked to get a degree." But history itself is I feel has cast me in the role of historian anyway, because I love preserving old recordings, scanning things in, kind of preserving it for the next generation, which of course I did with Sutton Park and everything, but also with old photographs for people, not the least of which my own family, is all on hard drive, and it's all accessible. So I do feel that not so much in worldwide history, but in sort of personal history, people's personal history, I've become a historian now. I failed history at school, but I feel that kind of history came back to claim me.
One of the things I enjoyed, I did a project. I can't remember if it's GCSE or A level, but I was able to do a project about the occupation of the Channel Islands, but going back to Bergerac, but although that's fictional, whereas I don't know if listeners outside of the UK realise quite how close the Germans got to occupying the UK in the Second World War. The Channel Islands are in the Channel, so they were on their way across, and they took out. They occupied the Channel Islands, and it was a number of miles from hitting the UK coast. But I found when you visit the Channel Islands, you see, particularly Guernsey. Guernsey didn't whitewash that history quite as much as Jersey did. Jersey knocked down a lot of what the Germans built on the island, but Guernsey, there's still a lot more fortifications on the coast that, and I always used to find that when we used to visit that quite fascinating to think also how close it all was. So I quite enjoyed doing that for a project at school, and I also, when I was doing my library degree, I did local studies, which was and again I had to do a project about some area. So of course I chose Sutton Park, and in Sutton Coldfield Library there was quite a lot of newspaper articles about things that had happened, much more ephemeral things or smaller things, like, I don't know, sort of displays or events that occurred in Sutton Park over the years. So I sort of did I did a project about that, but then I was able to use the excuse to go into Sutton Park, do an episode of Sutton Park or more, and take photos. So the photos that were in my project were ones I took myself in Sutton Park. The only negative thing about that was that I got an okay mark. I got above average mark, but the person who was marking it, I really lost respect for, because they put on there, see another project that somebody else has done on Sutton Park, and to sort of almost like to say, well, you know, yours was fine, but this one. And I went and I looked at this project. This was a project that somebody had done. They'd left by this point, and I may have told this story before, but the project was basically the Sutton Park guide that you could buy in the shop, and they had cut the pictures out of the guide, and the words that made the project were from the guide, and if you looked, you could see the words, you know, because they cut the pictures out of the guide, and there were words perhaps on the back of those. Those words were the words that were in the project.
Yeah.
And it had clearly been done at the last minute, day before it was supposed to be end, and all I could think was that he must really have liked that student.
Did you point it out to him?
No, that wouldn't have been a very good. That wouldn't have. You know, I did point it out to some of my colleagues on the course, some of my fellow students, but I thought, how blind you have to be to see that this is a complete last-minute crib job. And I only noticed it because I knew that guy. I knew the guide that they cut it out of. But yeah, I was kind of gobsmacked that he couldn't have seen that. It's bizarre.
But no, the other thing was with history is family history. My mum was writing to one of her distant cousins called Gina, whose great-grandfather was brothers with my grandfather, her father, mum's father, that is, and she's very into family history, and so she's been researching the Bates side, which is my mum's side of the family. So we're sort of working together on that. But even though she is kind of skipped a generation, even though I'm 53, I'm 53, and she's sort of in her late 70s. It's, you know, I'm a sort of generation higher than she is.
I've got some verbs now, 5 verbs. Pick any of these ones. Transport, commission, pop, cancel, or request. I mean, I mean, pop as in pop music. Obviously, that's something I'm very interested in. But then I don't really need to tell the listeners that, because they've heard me talking, and both of us talking to a certain extent. But I don't know where to start with that. I could do a whole episode on how I got into pop music, but I could also think of pop as in fizzy pop. I remember, I think this probably hasn't happened for a long time, but when you used to get fizzy pop in a bottle, sometimes it might come from the milkman, and when you used if you returned the bottle, then you had, like, I'm sure at one point it was 10p, but I'm sure it was less than that. But if you returned the bottle, you got they always paid you to help recycle it.
Very ahead of its time, really.
Yeah.
We had that in our local shop.
And as for transport, the thing that came to mind was travelling on trains, but specifically how antiquated a lot of the trains were relatively recently, except that it's not relatively recently anymore, really. But between, like, the late 80s and early noughties, the trains in Surrey, or some of the, or you still get really old looking trains, not steam trains, and also services that have been cut, because a lot of train services were cut back in the 50s, so that's before my time. A lot of, there were footpaths around here and other places where they were former train lines that have just been left to either turned into footpaths or cycleways, or just left to be grown over by nature. But I can remember when I used to visit my great aunt in Reading. I guess it was later than the late 80s. It was more like 91 or something. It's when I had my video camera anyway, just before the Sutton Park days. But there was a train that you could get direct from Salisbury to Reading, but it was which you can no longer do. You have to change in Basingstoke. But it was also a very weird train, because it was like a carriage. If you got on your carriage and you were stuck on that carriage, there was no going for a loo break. There was no a friend gets on another carriage and you just walk through into it. Once you were in that carriage, you were in that carriage. And that actually worked in my favour, because I remember as we left I was by myself. As I left Basingstoke, I realised that I was the only person in my carriage. So I was recording something, like a beat. It might have been a Retaliators play or something. But it might have been earlier in '92, and I was able to sort of do panicking scenes, or sort of like, I'm trapped on this train, help, let me out, that sort of thing. And I could bellow to my heart's content, because there were no CCTV cameras, there were no other passengers. I had a ready-made, and most of the things I've done have always very much been influenced by their locations, or if I get a good location, then that's part of what the story is going to be about. So to have an empty train carriage where you knew that you weren't going to get interrupted was very exciting for 18-year-old me, or whatever, with my new video camera. But then even where I live now, even in the early noughties, there were trains that stopped, which were very much like trains with like the mail van. And if we got very busy, you used to pile into because there was never any mail in the mail truck or the mail carriage. So sometimes when it was busy, you'd always end up standing in there. But there was also first class in the old style, with like you see if you watch, I don't know, the Avengers or something, and they're on a train with the corridor, with the slidey doors. And I remember my friend George telling me that they, like, I don't know how many carriages, how many compartments there were, 4 or 5, but he'd say the one at the end, that isn't first class. So yes, those ones, the other ones are all first class. But if you go to the 4th carriage or whatever, or the 4th compartment, then you're allowed to sit in it, because it's not first class. Yeah. But it's weird to think that the trains were still in that old style for a while. For the first few years I was living into the 21st century, very old style. Not every train, but it was like there were because we have trains that come from Woking, they start in Woking, but we also have trains that come from Guildford, and they start in Guildford. And I can't remember which one. I guess maybe it was the Guildford ones that were these more old-fashioned ones. So you get a very modern train. If you, depending on what train you went for, you either get a very modern one, or you get one of these much more old-fashioned ones.
I suppose with commission, I'm kind of thinking in terms of going back to the writing days on Magnet Editor and Life After, the 2 series I did. I suppose Joe Bunson and I would, and later with yourself, would commission stories, and would commission ourselves for stories. More sort of so. Obviously, before Joe arrived, I did all the stories myself, but not in any great detail. Whereas when Joe arrived, I was sort of obliged to sort of make detail. We used to allocate for certain slots of the seasons, and if you weren't careful, he would have commissioned a whole season to himself. He had to, he sort of, once we got going, sort of we were quite prolific, but yeah, we would commission each other to do various things, and I think with yourself, I mean, you kind of when we did Life After, you did your own thing, kind of in terms of his 3 stories. You can put them in whatever order that you like. Whereas I think we used to sort of say, if you do one here, I'll do one there. When eventually went to Polytechnic, we kind of completely lost the thread of that, because we didn't see each other quite so often. I with the films, I was very rarely commissioned. I'd sort of just do them. Whereas there was a film, the one that hasn't been digitalised yet, called Decry the Woman, which I was commissioned to do by Andy, our friend Andy Ching, because he was looking for a half-hour thing to direct. So that was actually a commission. I'm quite pleased about that. I don't get asked to do all that much these days. And in fact, Alan, our friend Alan, who, having done the books about Life After and The Magnet Editor, commissioned me to do 2 novelisations. So that was nice. A friend of mine does books and commissions a professional artist. I think, I don't know where they're based as professional artists, but they cost about £300, and it's all right. I don't know what the going price is supposed to be, but I've never really kind of shelled out that way myself. But
yeah, I have commissioned people to do artwork for my poetry books. Although largely, when I decided I wanted some illustrations or photos, I took the photos myself. But I can't really draw. I can doodle, and occasionally I put a doodle in. But it was more I think I probably would have done more, but it was more a case of, how do I get that doodle from the page onto a digital file without, I think what I did would just be, I'd take a photo of it, I think I just, didn't know my technology well enough to know how I could do that, or what I could do. You probably scan it now, whereas back then I'm not sure that was even an option. But I did commission a few people to do. Some people just did them for free, and some people I paid. People I've met online, like my book Funeral for a Shoe. There's 5 stories. There were 5 stories about the shoe whose funeral it was, the adventures they'd had, and I got somebody to illustrate each of those pieces, but then they also did back covers of books, or just and some of the people I met. One person I did meet, he lived in London, and one person lived in America, so I never actually met him. But I actually I did pay them money to do the artwork, not necessarily with any hope or thought that I would get that money back from sales, because to a certain extent my books are my hobby as well. So for most hobbies you have to pay something. If you're a fisherman, you have to buy a fishing rod, and you have to buy. So sometimes,
And I suppose also before Alan commissioned me, I commissioned Alan to when I did the Life After, Magnet Editor and Life After books. I kind of, because they were such a labour of love and it had gone on for so many years putting them together, I wanted a really, really good cover, and I'd been impressed with the covers he'd done for his company, the Hidden Tiger. And I said, it took me a long time to pluck up courage to do it, because it was a very particular niche sort of thing. This series that was years ago and it was quite childish, and he liked it so much. When he read the manuscript, he liked it so much that he said, "Well, I can publish this for you." And yes, please, as well as doing the cover. So, and of course, he's had heart surgery at the moment. So the last book I wrote for him, I wrote 2 years ago in 2020, and he's still sort of working on editing it at the moment. So
I should probably tell. I can always cut this, or
Yeah.
it depends when it goes out. I was having a word with Martin. He offered to take or if I send him the Word file of our book.
Oh, brilliant.
He'll have a look and see whether he can see any problem or any way around it. Or I just need to make sure. I need to make to find which was the final version of the Word file. What was the most complete version?
What, A Woman for Reasons?
Yeah. Just which is the because I did.
He wouldn't mind doing a cover for us whilst he's at it.
Because I was. He's just had a lot more luck with his books on Lulu, but then I think that's because he's not coming from Word. He's not necessarily coming from Word files. He's because he does know what he needs to do with and transferring his photos digitally. And he probably uses a package which is just a lot more. I don't know.
Well, if he does come up with a really good solution, it might be an idea to let Alan know about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. He may find what the problem. He may better suggest what the problem is, in a way that is understandable rather than what the actual site itself is being rather unhelpful.
Blinding us with science. Yeah. But yeah, commissions are always nice. As I say, I was commissioned to do my play Cradle Snatcher, which I did 27 years ago with where I met our friend Michelle, and that was a good thing to do. And another one with the One Act Play Festival, I almost got a commission for a studio theatre, but unfortunately they cancelled the One Act Play Festival before I was able to do one for them.
I've got another 5 words. And then after that, I've got another idea. But these any of these ones: ignore, ask, stake, cupboard, or race. I can think of little things to say about 3 or 4 of those.
I mean, ignore. I will keep my opinions to myself as far as certain aspects of married life goes. But as in terms of sort of getting a word in edgeways or one's other half, not really taking it. However, I think I'll go for cupboard. Cupboards. I like cupboards. They contain lots of interesting stuff, and in particular, say like for the some parks we've been finding whatever tapes we used to look for in cupboards. That's always been interesting.
I was thinking of our cupboard just outside the door where the room we're sitting that used to have all my videotapes in.
That's right. We used to have a good old rummage in there, didn't we?
You'd forget what you'd recorded, or as time went on,
oh blimey, that's on tape. Even now, today, this afternoon, I've looked in your
coffee's on the stairs. I've got to answer the doorbell.
Okay, no worries. And I found sort of tapes where I thought, ooh, have I got that? It'd be nice to have a copy of it. So, also, I think, going back a little bit further, I used to like cupboards in terms of hiding and making dens. I used to love dens when I was a kid. And there was a cupboard, vaguely described as a cupboard. It didn't really have a door, but just under the sink, just to one side of the sink, there was a kind of cavity more than a cupboard. I remember making that my den. And I used to hide. We had a broom cupboard in the beaches. It was big enough to hide in, because I do remember I used to hide in there when How Deep Is Your Love was in the charts, because it used to make me cry, and I used to hide away from it and sort of go, I can't hear you, doctor.
There's a cupboard under the stairs in this house, which back in my day wasn't actually. It was an alcove. It didn't have a door to it.
Yeah.
But I still used it as a camp.
Yeah.
But sometimes it was a little bit unfortunate, because that's where the cats also took their dead mice and things. Sometimes you go there and think, oh, what's that thing? But I don't think they could do that now because there's a door to it.
I'll just pause to get the copies.
Yeah.
Hello listeners, it's me, Cuthbert. We're going to have a quick break now for 10 minutes or so, just to give the guys a break from chatting and so that they can fetch their coffees! We were discussing Sutton Park at the beginning of the show, and here we have the last of our clips from spring 1998. There are plenty of other episodes to share from around this time, but we've been using quite a lot of material from this era of the show on the podcast of late, so next time we'll be jumping ahead a couple of 100 episodes to see what is going on later that same year. But anyway, for now we're in March 1998 for clips from episodes 2017 and 2018. After that we'll return to Paul and Nick for more random words. Enjoy!
Stop. We head back to library, yeah? We head back? I want to know what you meant when you spoke. You said there's not enough power. You said the choices be made. I want to know what you meant. How does this mean?
It's choices. Choices, Mummy, can't you see? The cure is taking longer to define than I thought. The thing is, the power is limited. There are 4 bodies that are being preserved. Cromites, Helena, Clowers, and the inspectors. Well, I do not think there's enough power to run all 4.
So, one of them have to go? Like the vampire, Clara, she go?
Yes, but that is all very well. Except that what has happened to Cromity recently may have changed everything. Don't you understand? All this exposure, all this sudden awakening from the suspended animation may have damaged him. Don't you understand? Cromity may be damaged beyond repair. We put him back there now, but whether it's worth continuing the cure, whether he's worth saving, whether we should not just isolate and specify on the inspector, for instance. I'm sorry. I'm afraid Cromity is probably long past saving. I'm afraid it's too late. So, it would appear that Cromity's future is in danger as a result of the fight that Gongart's Nemesis had there initially. Yes. Well, it would seem that a number of characters no longer have a future. Yes. My plans for the series, the new Sutton Park, would not involve Cromity, and neither John, who is currently searching for a house along with Paul and Callum. Poor John. I have already begun the beginning of the end for him. A slight illness, incurable. A slight cough that will develop into far more. Alas, poor John. You coming, John? Oh, yeah. Yeah, just coming. Alas, poor John. Come on, John. You okay? Yeah. Alas, poor John. Alas. Yes. Well, the future of Sutton Park does not include John. I am afraid it is time for him to depart. Oh yes. The critical illness will soon set itself upon him. This is just the beginning. But, like Cromity, his days are numbered. Oh yes. Alas, poor John. be there. Just look.
Hampton was going outside to play. Because it's nice and sunny, we're going out, alright? Go on, Owen.
Wait, oh, blimey. Wait for me then. I better come with you. I better come. Oh, dear. So, Mummy, I mean, what can I say? Other than bad news. The future for comedy looks very dim, but it's not up to me to make the decision. I'm going to have to face Paul. Tell him a choice is going to have to be made. We can't run all 4 terminals anymore. And the cure's just not ready. He's going to have to make a choice. As far as I'm concerned, although I hate to say it, Comedy may well be damaged beyond repair. It may not even be worth saving him.
That's terrible. Bad news. Not so good. Not good. I wonder what... Just a minute. Look. Can you see them? Over there. This is Gorgongoth and Ramesses. They mad. They follow the spirit. Zanzibar. Oh, look, over there.
Zanzibar. You were telling me about this. The Bargards got involved. Some sort of cult to do with the puppets. Sounds very dodgy to me. Very dodgy indeed. So, what are we going to do? Just a minute. Wait for me! Oi! I never said anything about going to the woods. You said the garden. Wait! Jay and Owen and Hampton.
Oh, this bad. Gorgongoth Ramesses. They tried to convert Owen and Jay the other day.
Oh my goodness. It does sound like they've gone totally loopy. They got muddled up in some really strange occult.
It's not safe. Not safe for them to be out, but not with Gorgongoth around. Not with them there. Not safe.
Then something's got to be done, hasn't it? Something's got to be done to stop them before it all gets out of hand.
I think the way that we communicate with each other, I think it feels a lot more personal. In the past, if you wrote to somebody, you might not hear from them. You wouldn't expect to hear from them for days, but now these days you can sort of fixate on, well, I've just sent that person a message. And I can see they're online because the lights up, and they haven't replied. It's only a quick question. Why couldn't they reply? And it can get sort of in a way you'd never, or you just ring people. But people don't. I don't know. Maybe people do ring their friends. But when I've read my 1990 diary, I see how many people I used to talk to on the phone all the time, and now it's sometimes you feel ignored in a way you never used to feel ignored. Because you can see that people have been talking to other people. You can see that depending. It's very easy to kind of, if you're not in the right frame of mind, to take it the wrong way, or take it as an offence.
Absolutely, I I mean, I'm not a big look at me person, but I quite agree. I find, you know, when you think, oh, they've liked that bit, why haven't you liked mine? In fact, we ran into a spot of bother actually because this week, because I put something nice up about, because I've been living with Ali for 20 years, and I put pictures and everything, and everybody was very nice and sort of liked it and loved it, everything, and she just ignored it, didn't comment, didn't even look at it, and was putting up all these things about people's, you know, the sort of you know, actors' birthdays and things like that, and all the usual gubbins she puts. And I thought, well, why I bother? I actually took it down in the end. I thought, well, what's the point of mine if the very person it's sort of kind of promoting, they can't having the common decency to actually look at it.
But then sometimes Facebook, when it's Facebook High, you know, you get to see some people's posts far often than you do, and it could be really weird. You have it, or suddenly 3 days later you see a post. You think, well, why didn't I see that at the time? Unless you actually go to each other's
also,
pages.
When I came, you know, I frequently have crises of confidences on Facebook, and I thought, well, you know, nobody really, not enough people really bother, you know, apart from my usual, you know, yourself and, you know, sort of, and you know what, I just don't feel in a good place here, and so I came off last Lent. So I've been back since last Easter, and I suppose that, you know, with the sort of upset with that, I felt a bit wobbly.
And I think it also, sometimes I've heard people say how they mute people. I can understand muting people if they're always talking about politics. I mean, I don't want to get into that because that's a whole issue in itself and quite upsetting. But it's more like I heard somebody say, like, oh, they've deleted people just because they've posted what their score was in Wordle today or something. Just ignore it. Why be you know, or people muting some of their friends' pages just because they post too much. Or
I had a radical rethink when I went back to Facebook, and said there are certain people, some of which I care about, that I just do not contribute whatsoever, and I might as well not be there. And I post up things that I think, you know, they should at least go ooh, and so I've you know, I haven't gone back to them, even though, you know, at one point we were close. I mean, if they were to send me a friend's request, I'd probably accept it, but I just feel that, in all honesty, they're not interested in my life anymore, and you know, I suppose, you know, I find that very disappointing, but at the same time, it's I suppose it's inevitable, really.
Well, I mean, even in podcasting, it's one of those things you hear a lot of podcasters saying that they don't really get feedback. Some shows do, and some shows don't get much feedback. And I would say with this show, but most of the people who give me the most feedback have then ended up being recruited onto the show because you do occasionally get surprised people who don't usually comment who do, and I can tell you it makes a podcaster's day for a listener to say, oh, they really enjoyed that. Or but
the other thing is when you have stuff up on YouTube, and you get something that gets thousands of likes, and at the same, you know, and it's some kitten messing around with a cotton reel or something, and you put up your own creative work, and you get views, but you don't get likes. You know, I thought, well, you know, are people really that indifferent, or they just don't bother liking it? Or
I worry for people whose social media success is only based on their looks, because the chances you need to work on your personality as well, because there's some people out there who, unfortunately, it's just they've got their latest shirtless picture or whatever. You think, well, 20 years down the line, you probably, unless you're lucky, you're probably not going to be doing that, and people aren't, and that's going to probably hurt. So
that's right.
You need to kind of You need to be more than a pretty face.
Yeah. Twitter, I felt very ignored when I first came on Twitter, mainly because, you know, again, not even my other half would used to communicate. I've persevered. I've been back on Twitter nearly a year now, and I don't really look at it as much as Facebook, but I do hop on and like things and read Twitter. And the other thing is Joe, my old writing partner, is on that, but not Facebook. So I do have a sort of line of communication there, which I didn't before.
I mean, the whole world of friendships kind of changed for me. Some of my closest friends I've never actually met.
Yes.
I've met them online. I've met them on Zoom, or I've met them. You know, I was talking to another friend how much recording I've done with Martin Holmes, or doing different shows, and yet we still haven't got around to meeting, partly because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And people, and I think people I know who are listeners have been shocked when I've said that we've never met, because presumably we have a good rapport on the various shows we've all done together with him, but equally so, you know, obviously I've never met Toppy in person. I've never met Jay in person. I mean, it's a weird sort of world where I knew Toppy and Jay from podcasts, and particularly Toppy. I listened to the Smellcast and I thought, this is somebody I really need to kind of collaborate with, or he reminds me of somebody I would have had in Sutton Park, and I kind of sort of chased him down and kind of look at me, hello, we need to be friends, and
you get people like that, don't you?
But I remember
we're a bit like that with Elaine.
Yeah.
She first, I think she was a friend of a friend, and she put some of her creative stuff on a Doctor Who tape, the end of a Doctor Who tape. And I think all three of us, you, me and Keith, kind of more, ooh, actually this is someone we need to be attached to, you know. She's a lot of fun.
And with Jay, I'd always liked, when he'd been on Lotzel, I'd always liked his voice, because obviously I didn't even see what people look like, but I always liked his voice. His voice was really good on that show, and I liked his personality. But I didn't necessarily know how to introduce myself, and then I found out that he sort of left Lotzel as well for a while, and then he came back. But somewhere along the way, I started my show and discovered that he'd been listening to my show. He knew. So it was kind of like, oh, well, I know who you are. You know who I am.
It's sometimes a long game, isn't it? Because Alan, I knew Alan Hayes. I knew of him 16 years before we became friends. I mean, I bought his Doctor Who tape scene, Sonic Waves, back in early '85, and I became aware of him, and I handed it to Keith in this school, you know, at break time at school, and he became very interested in it, and he knew of Alan, so you know, I think he met Alan probably before I did, because he met him at a convention or something, but I didn't meet Alan until there was a revival of Sonic Waves, because you know, he put the feelers out, and there was a lot of interest, and we recorded 21 years ago. We recorded a video which I don't seem to have anymore, unfortunately. But it was about, you know, sort of talking about Sonic Waves and how it became. And I took part, and so did Troby and Keith, and. The next thing I know, I get a telephone call. I think I wrote to Alan and say, you know, well, this is what we've done, and I got a telephone call from Alan, and we never looked back. You know, we've been friends ever since. With his wife.
Well, I remember when I first met him with you in that one meeting, I discovered that he liked the Avengers, he liked Dark Shadows, and at that point, not that many people liked Dark Shadows quite to the level that he did, or actually owned the sets like I did, and I was kind of like, oh, wow, who's this person? I know who this person is, but I didn't know this person liked all these things.
But I mean, you know, it was. I suppose there was it wasn't like befriending a celebrity, but you know, it was quite a big deal for me when we became personal friends.
Well, that's what happened. We were talking about this earlier with my friend Lee, who was in Sutton Park. He was one of the few people who I actually, when he was getting into Sutton Park and taking part in it, he was one of the few people where I would send him a tape as I edited it, I would send him an edited tape, so he would actually be watching every single episode as they were, but he was a few years behind. But he felt he knew Troby or Elaine or Nick, or before he'd even met you all.
Exactly.
And I remember when he met Elaine, she didn't really know who he was, and I think he thought that I guess he thought maybe that she was watching all the episodes like he was, but actually that was a rarer thing. Troby definitely got to the stage where he was having tapes, but it wasn't everybody who watched every episode.
I think with the edited episodes, I got a feeling.
Yeah.
I've got a feeling between us, Ali and I did a lot of the edited ones.
Yeah. But so I remember years ago, like in the noughties, I went to a friend. This is to do with the Shy Yeti nickname. I remember going to see a play with of a mutual friend. Well, not a mutual friend. I met this guy who was at. I went to see a friend who was in a play, and in the interval, this guy came up to me who also knew my friend, and it was his friend. I'm not telling this very well, but he said to me, "Oh, you're that Shy Yeti guy." He didn't remember. He didn't know what my. Yeah. He knew. He'd seen my picture and seen somewhere and seen that, but he couldn't remember that my name was Paul. And it was about the only time I think anyone's ever kind of. I did feel sort of slightly. Not famous, but slightly sort of. It was funny that the nickname had transcended to the fact that people knew it beyond. Because originally it was just a pen name I used on a Doctor Who internet forum, like an early forum.
Yeah.
But then it kind of entered into my creative life and became a name that I performed under, or it also became. There are lots of different versions of Shy Yeti. There are fictional versions of Shy Yeti in Mouth of Commons books, and it became a whole thing.
Equally, when I played Professor Bosch in Alan the Pussycat Went to Sea at the Alderbury Players, it was one of the girls that played. There was these little birds, these small kids that came on as little birds. And she came up to me in W.H. Smith and said, "Hello, Professor." I thought, oh, that's sweet. A few years later, we were playing. Believe it or not, we were playing lovers. It's a weird world acting.
The only other. There's two words in that list I'm just going to mention briefly. Steak. I was just saying to my mum today. Obviously, I like pies. I used to like a steak and kidney pie or steak and kidney pudding, but I was saying to my mum, do you think you could even buy, I'm sure you can from somewhere, but can you even buy a steak and kidney pudding anymore, or steak and kidney pie? Because sort of things like kidney and liver, which I was brought up on, they're not very popular these days. I don't suppose Marks and Spencer's necessarily does a steak and kidney pie. They probably do a steak and mushroom pie. I think mushroom or steak and vegetable pie. I think those sort of replaced kidney, because probably people didn't like kidney.
I tell you what, we have the Frey Bentos steak and kidney pies, which are still knocking around. We still have some of those as a sort of filler meal. But steak, I have to say, steak is not something that really appeals to me, because I'm my teeth, I have a few less teeth than I used to, and I wouldn't be able to cope with the steak now, but with even back in the day, I always found steak a bit tough.
And ask, this is a tenuous one, but when I think of the word ask, I think of the song by the Smiths called Ask, and then I think of I jump off again and I think of going to 1996 with my friend Darren. Now, Darren, when I came back to Birmingham to do a 6-month job between late 95 and 96, he lived in the room that my friend Kerry had. But of course, Kerry, we both left university, and it's just that then I had a job and I ended up going back to my same digs. And I went back to my same little room at the top of the house. And it was weird to find somebody else living in Kerry's room.
Yeah.
And that was Darren, and he was only there for about 3 of the months. He moved out around the New Year, and we stayed friends. In fact, we used to, I think after he'd left the house, we used to meet up once a week for a booze up on a Wednesday night.
Yeah.
And back in those days where I could go out for quite a few drinks and still get up for work the next morning in the middle of the week. And also Darren, I'm still in touch with him to this day, but I went to his wedding. It was very nice in the middle of the countryside, and there was all candles. And when it got dark, the whole place was. I think it was very. I don't know quite what style you say it would, but it was all. There was no electric lights, and it was all sort of very sort of
rustic.
Yeah. And also, funnily enough, I think of Darren because. He was a big fan of the Smiths and that sort of music, and goth and all that sort of thing. And when I had my graduation at university, it fitted in quite nicely because it fell into that 6 months. It wasn't. I think the misconception would be that when you graduated, you'd have your graduation ceremony quite soon after, but actually. I got my marks in the summer of '95 and didn't actually have my graduation until the spring of '96. And of course, by that stage, even though I was living in Birmingham, I wasn't quite as au fait with who was still in Birmingham, and I didn't have although I was saying I used to make a lot more phone calls. Perhaps I didn't have phone numbers for a lot of university friends, because I did have 1 or 2 lasting friends from university, but. We were quite a small group, and we sort of disintegrated a bit because people fell off the course and things. And but so actually, on my graduation, the day of my graduation, Darren had his housewarming party, and I got to go to a party on my graduation, but it was nothing to do with my graduation. It was to do with the house. But it was still nice to have a party to go to, because I wasn't somebody who got invited to parties very often.
No, I didn't until I was about 18, and I had a party. Then my friend Matt, invited me to his party, and then her friend Philomena, his friend Philomena, invited me to her party, and I thought, this is good, And it was suddenly by 87 I was going to quite a few parties, much to my delight.
And anyway, I always remember Darren saying, because when I got into the Smiths, I appreciated some. I'm not that happy. I'm not happy with Morrissey as a person these days, so I don't listen to them as much. But when I was getting into them back then. The lyrics tickled me, and I found it sort of almost like a black comedy. A lot of the songs were quite black comedy, and I remember Darren saying, "You shouldn't be getting into the Smiths. You're not depressed. Why are you listening to this?" And I would say, "I don't find the Smiths depressing. I don't." And I think Harry, he's not. His interest in music is quite limited to certain groups. Shakespeare's Sister being the main one from the early '90s, late '80s, early '90s. And I think, but at some point he did listen to some Morrissey and some Smiths back before he got a bit controversial. I think he said the same thing. He didn't find it depressing. He found the lyrics playful or sort of funny or pithy or dark humoured. And but I do always remember Darren telling me off being into the Smiths. I needed to be depressed as well. I couldn't just
if you like it, if you like something, you like something. You don't need a reason.
I guess he probably was into them at the time, and whereas this was in the 10 years down the line, I wasn't having it wasn't my. I mean, a lot of people, it becomes like with goth and all that sort of thing. Yeah. It's almost like a lifestyle, and it's an image as well that you listen to it, but you also dress like that. And I can see, but just that wasn't my experience. I just came to them as I thought, I haven't really listened to the Smiths. I ought to listen to the Smiths as a sort of somebody who's interested, like a bit. I'm quite magpie-like with my with my music interests. I'm kind of like, I ought to try an album by that person. Yeah. Anyway. I want to do something to finish with, but we'll probably do that we'll do one more lot of words, then we'll say goodbye, and then there's something I want to do that's slightly different, just to finish off. We've got just 3 words. We've got tube, tourist, or hill.
Ooh.
I can think of something for all 3 of those, but they may not be long anecdotes. They might just.
Yeah, I mean, the hill. I think there's several. I've known several hills in my lifetime. The Harnham Hill, of course, that was just behind me when I lived in Kent Road in Harnham, and that was always good for a walk, especially when I was a kid. We used to go walking around there on New Year's Day. We used to do cross-country runs up there in all weathers when I was about 10, and it was later. Much later, later it was about 10 years later. It was used for locations for our early films. There was a Blake 7 parody which we did up there, along with the Chalk Pit, and we also did Sutton Park Prison in the Sun,
and Sutton Park in general. Yeah,
Sutton Park.
It was the go-to location from your house if we wanted to go and do something, but it was only 5 minutes walk away.
Exactly, yeah. It was very, very convenient, and we many good things were done there. Later still, it was the site of, after I got married, it was the site of a plaque for the Workers' Memorial place, because Ali is into the TUC, and one of her TUC colleagues planted a plant there. I've got a video of it somewhere, which is good just as well, because a lot of the people in it have gone now. But and there's a lovely shot of my mum and Ali's mum talking. But yeah, that was unfortunately vandals dug it up.
In the Chalk Pit, I had to stick a microwave. I had to stick a microphone up Warren's trousers.
I think you would have known a microwave down his trousers.
I don't know how many of us had microwaves in early 90s.
I don't think you needed one. If I remember rightly, it was a baking hot day.
Yeah. But that was when we were doing another Doctor Who spoof, and I had learnt lots of lines. But I was also, as well as being an actor, I was having to help with microphones.
I would have loved to have done more for that one, but unfortunately, I had to work.
Got a visitor peeking through the window.
The cat that was in the room earlier in the recording is now out of the room.
You can't come in that way.
He's trying to break in from the outside. Too late. You've had to charge. You should have stayed here.
We're like upstairs. We're like upstairs as well.
How did she get up there?
From the balcony in my study.
Of course. But
anyway,
so I do remember that. A hill, yes, Harnham Hill. Harnham Hill also, with the Chalk Pit, was used for other films. To Cry the Woman and See You Never, which were later films of mine that were done up there. And Andrew Candish, one of our friends who directed things, always had a want to do a film up there. I don't think we ever got round to it. We did parts of film. We did where he was in Wogan's as well. But Hills also Roundway Hill, which I went up in 1980 with the junior school when I went to Braeside, which was like an overnight stay weekend thing for kids with the school, which was it. It was my first first time ever staying away from home. These days, you get that experience.
We did something like that. We went to the Brecon Beacons. That's definitely Hills in Wales, and that was my last week of primary school. Well, the Monday to the Monday to the Thursday of my last week ever of primary school, and that was quite. I
liked it. I don't think I was actually all that well on the Saturday night. I remember feeling a bit fluey and tucked up in bed at Roundway with a Doctor Who book.
That trip to Brecon Beacons was one I think I've talked to briefly about. Like, it was the first time that people had been away from home and everyone was trying to call their mum, and the headmistress decided that people were thinking too much about home and ringing and she sort of banned everyone using the phone, and I was actually on the call when she was doing, so I got to speak to my mum, but I knew that it was sort of
a bit prisony, phone calls home.
But the one thing that was funny about that is it did sort of bring together a bit of my love of Wales, and later when I did the Offa's Dyke Path with my friend Andrew Reid, that was a lot of hills as well, and but I remember that we'd done some sort of walk, and at the end of the walk we were all playing around in this stream that was getting all wet and everything with our clothes on and everything, and the headmistress kind of getting all sort of snooty about it, but the person who ran the Outward Bound thing sort of said, well, you're under my jurisdiction now, and I remember, I think it was all done quite subtly, but I think we became aware that there was a bit of a tension between the head of the Outward Bound place and the headmistress, because she didn't necessarily have the authority as much as she would have liked to. But
it was an interesting experience, though. Railway Hill, yes, that I do remember as kind of persevering with the weather, because it was very wet and very windy, and when we went back to the base, as it were, they had. They all there was a load of them sat around with the PE teacher watching the football, and I thought, ooh. But no, it was a fun experience. I was nervous about it because it was my first time away from home, but it was good.
I don't really feel like my parents' village is in a hilly area, but I can see hills up there. There are hills, and there's a place called Clearbury, which I filmed Sutton Park in a few times. Did a very wet episode up there, which I've with Andrew, which has been on the show as I've been on the podcast. There's also the Mismays, which, although once you're up there, you don't realise you don't feel like you're on a hill, but to get up there, you go up a hill, and that's a very. We've talked about the Mismays as well. That's a very sort of. There are lots of sort of ghosty type stories, or people who experience things there. There's something very unsettling about that area, and it goes back many years. It's one of the only places I've been to where I felt like I was being maybe watched, or there was something about. And of course, you and I would record at the hill in Laverstock.
I was going to mention Laverstock Hill, yeah. Yes, I was at school at the bottom of the hill at Highbury in the 80s, 80 to 85, and we used to do regular cross-country runs up the path to the Panda. There's on the peak of the hill, there's somebody, just like hippies, carved a panda face. In I think it was 70, and it's still, you can just about still, it's faded very much with time, and my music teacher, who was a bit of a writer as well, wrote a musical called Pandagram, which was based on the panda as a sort of mystical, powery kind of thing, and it was really rather good.
The thing is, as you come into Salisbury on the train, you got the right perspective. You were far enough away from it to appreciate it. So, I think I was talking to my mum the other day, and I had to sort of say to her, well, "No, you can't really see it anymore because I suppose if she's ever gone past it, it's been in the car, and you're much closer to it, and it's probably hard to see." But from going past in the train, I haven't been aware of it for a long time. But
you can just about make out a certain mark on it.
Yeah.
But no, long after school, you and I done some Sutton Park there, and I think Ali and I went up there first at the end during the first lockdown when we just went for a walk.
It was one of those locations again that I sort of. If I didn't know it already, I was certainly reminded of it when I had to do cross-country runs in the sixth form. It was one of the runs that was suggested. But of course, tube. We've spent a lot of our lives on tube trains, particularly back in I think of the days when we were doing films, and perhaps we were filming one end of the tube at Elaine's house, and then we had to go, perhaps we were sleeping over down in Lisa's house at the other end of the tube line.
I feel guilty about that because we did a film in '94 called An Evil Trophy, which Andrew Candish didn't really know much about London back then. He's lived there for most of the rest of that time. And I said, well, we've got Lisa's up for it, and we've got some locations at Lisa's house, and we've got Elaine's. And of course, I've been to Lisa's and I've been to Elaine's, but I've never done, I don't think I'd ever done the trip from one to the other. And of course, it took a lot longer than I was anticipating. Yeah. And I don't think, I didn't factor it in, so therefore Andrew didn't factor it in. And I think we should have done, I think we did it between the two, in about 3 days. But I, with hindsight, I should have pushed for all one weekend at Lisa's or all one weekend at Elaine's. And of course, a few years before, when I used to go out with Elaine, that really was my first time in London solo. Because before I met you, I used to go out with my mum. And really, my first time in London without my mum was with you in 1990. I think it was 90. And from 90 onwards, the pair of us were going up there regularly. And if we weren't seeing friends, we were going to comic marts, or we were going to comic marts and seeing friends. And it was...
I used to date somebody who lived in Dagenham, and that's a little bit closer to London than where Lisa lived, but not much, only a couple of stops. But in their more snipey moments, they'd sometimes accuse me of staying at their house because it was better for work. And yet, actually, going from Dagenham to Victoria on the tube takes almost as long as going from my house to Waterloo, or probably longer. It's not a quick journey. So actually, it might have been slightly cheaper, but it certainly wasn't quicker, even though you're actually on the tube, and my flat, you're not on the tube. But
coincidentally, one of my exes now lives in Dagenham.
Yeah.
The tube became a very big part of our lives from 90 onwards, I think. And now, even now, Ali, I go to London quite often because Ali works for the Actors Church there. She gets gigs, not every single week, but she's up there quite regularly. And we spent a few days up in London a couple of weeks ago. She had like 3 gigs on the trot. And she does the tube now, and we've got oysters. And
as for tourists, I think we probably covered that in various episodes we've done where we've talked about holidays we've had together, and we've been tourists together and separately, obviously, over the years. But you could do a whole episode on that if you haven't already.
You're very good to go on holiday with, because you kind of want to do things beyond just looking at the sights. I'm not a very good tourist. I'm one of these people that can go away for a couple of days and that's it. After that, I'm homesick, or I get.
I think I want to put my mark. I want to put my mark on the place I'm visiting as much as I want it to put its mark on me. Or I want to have a more than just a souvenir. I want to have an episode of the podcast, or an episode of Sutton Park, or an episode of when I used to do my poetry videos. I'm very glad because I think probably of all the things I did overseas that were creative, doing my poetry videos in lots of different locations, I got to show off that was a very good balance of showing off the sites and doing something creative.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, when you and I went to Cambridge, we did The Rivals, the commercial story, The Rivals. That was fun because I love Cambridge to bits anyway, and it was really nice to be able to do something in and around the place.
But it's sort of nice to do something that's a holiday, but it's also a project. Usually, if you go somewhere if you were a TV company, it wouldn't be a holiday. It would be you'd be doing your work, and then in the evening you might get a few hours in a pub or something. But the way we did things, it didn't have the pressure of it being, for something where we were being paid to do it. We were doing it of our own choice.
Yeah. But unless there's some really interesting stuff going on, I struggle a bit with holidays. Scotland's very nice, but one has to be quite patient with the sort of the touristy bit. We are actually, for the first time since COVID, we're going to Scotland this autumn for Ali's birthday.
Listeners, I think that's what we've got time for. We will have a couple of words right at the end. Anyway, thanks, Nick.
Pleasure, as ever.
I thought we haven't done one for almost a year.
Well, there's always good value for money because you don't know what is coming up, and all sorts of random stuff tumble out of one's head.
Yeah, and I like to be surprised. I like to not better plan too much. Anyway, listeners, join us again soon. We've got plenty of episodes in the can. And we'll have Nick back again very soon as well. So
make it sound like I've been away. I've been locked up.
Yeah, well, I hope not. Anyway, yes, we'll be back after the theme music for a couple more words. But other than that, we'll say goodbye for now. Bye-bye for now. Bye. Okay, what I thought I'd do, I'll do 3 words because it might be a bit much to say, but you'll have, you can say your piece and then we'll do another one and I'll say my piece on that word, so we won't. What I was thinking is, I'm going to choose a letter of the alphabet for you, and then we'll get 3 words with that letter, and then you can choose my letter of the alphabet, and we'll see. So I think I'm going to. What should I choose for you? I'm going to choose the letter G, and we'll see. Okay. We've got, for Nick, we have graphic, guitar, or glasses.
Ooh. Graphic, guitar, glasses.
Have you ever played a guitar? I don't know.
No. I actually don't. I've never actually gotten around to playing a musical instrument. Not because I don't want to, but it's just I've never actually learned it. But if I was to do two things, I'd like to. One is the piano. And the other is the guitar. Yeah, I think guitar. No, actually, I'd narrow that right down, and I'd say guitar because it's really nice. The idea of sort of picking up a guitar and having a strum is really quite groovy. Groovy. Back to groovy again. Yeah, as I say, I think my brother-in-law, ex-brother-in-law, used to play the guitar because he had a guitar knocking around. Is there some? I think one of my current brothers-in-law plays. I think might have a guitar because he was very into sort of 60s bands and things like that. I think he might have a guitar. But musically, I've kind of always I like music, but I like listening to music, and I never really I've sort of resisted any kind of attempts to learn a musical instrument. I don't know. I kind of. Maybe you'd have to. I think it's the baggage that goes with it, having to learn all the sort of notes and things like that, and it's the whole world that goes with it.
Yeah, I think I'm probably better with piano than I would be with guitar because, well, I have had more experience with piano than guitar, but I think I'd probably fumble around with my Yeti paws. I think I think it's easier to play the piano than it is to fiddle around with with strings, but I certainly, would have quite liked to have if that experience had happened. But
my sister learned the trumpet, and I do remember that she used to go to this place. I can't remember where it was, but it smelled of disinfectant and had long dark corridors. And she used to go there on a Saturday morning and learn the trumpet.
I used to learn the cornet, which isn't a million miles away from being a trumpet, but I got out of it because it annoyed me because it used to clash with either repeats of Blake Seven or when Doctor Who was on during the week, when it was on twice a week, and back then we didn't have videos. If you missed something, you missed it.
Yeah. Although I think you were saying, weren't you saying that about 83 you had?
Yeah, I think we hired one, but I think that was more during the summer holidays. I think that was because Uncle Roger was ill and we had to cancel a summer holiday, so we hired a video as a bit of a novelty or something. So,
yeah, but I think that would have been, I remember, Roger Gannon.
Yes.
Yeah, I remember when he had his heart attack.
But,
yeah.
Very quickly, because we need to swap over, and I can hear the theme music coming. How long have you had glasses for?
Glasses, I have had glasses since 1981. I was knocked down, they used to say in the playground, it wasn't the playground, it was by the ice cream van. One moment I was buying a funny feed, and the next I was flying through the air. It was some careless fifth year had gone cannoned into me, and I'd taken a flying, and it was the most bizarre experience of my life. It's the only time I've ever been knocked unconscious, and you kind of the whole of reality suddenly turned into little bites, chunks of consciousness, and you kind of the whole world turned. It was a frightening experience, but I swear I had perfect eyesight before that. A few months after that, I began to notice that. Well, first thing I noticed was Metal Mickey was blurry. I remember watching Metal Mickey and thinking, well, this isn't up to scratch, and getting my eyes tested. And sure, I didn't wear glasses all the time back then. It was just for schoolwork, the blackboard and things like that. And that was the way it was for quite a number of years. And I think I noticed it, but I think between 85 and 90, I started sort of wearing glasses more permanently, because I noticed the deterioration when I was, because there was about a 5-year gap from the acting. So I did Roger's pantomime, Cinderella in 95, and I didn't really appear on stage again until 90 when I did the ARS at Studio Theatre. And I remember taking my glasses off for the part and being struggling noticeably with my seeing where I'm going. And in fact, there was a woman playing my wife, and she used to guide me around the stage. So I've got so used to acting without my glasses on the stage now. It doesn't bother me in the slightest. I prefer to act without my glasses.
I had glasses at primary school, but only for quite a brief period, and I never wore them as much as I should have done. But it seemed to correct what the problem was. I didn't wear glasses again really until after I had my blood pressure problems in the teens, and then I think that might have and even now I have a very small prescription. I wear them more if my eyes get tired, but I hope he doesn't mind me sharing it, but Toby tells a story of how, and it's incredible to think this was only in the late 70s, early 80s. For years he was considered to be, how to put it, well, basically he had eye problems, and that wasn't what they just thought he was lazy or stupid or whatever you want to say. But he couldn't read because he couldn't see the words properly, and he needed glasses really badly but the idea that wouldn't have been picked up, and it would have been presumed the worst would have been presumed, rather than thinking, he probably has bad eyesight. It's just crazy to me. I can't imagine how that could have happened. But then they were overseas, so whether whether the forces, whoever it was that you got your eyes tested when you were in the forces, just weren't as up on that sort of thing.
Yeah.
I don't know, but
until '86, I had the ghastly tortoiseshell glass, sort of national health glasses, which was. So since '86, I've had non-national health glasses. Yeah, I've got used to it now. I did about '99. I was I tested out for contact lenses, but I just couldn't tolerate them in my eye. It didn't work.
I remember Kerry at university having contact lenses, and then we'd go out for a drink or something, and he'd have to remember to take them out, otherwise. The idea of touching your eye and mucking around with it, or having problems or getting stuff in.
I couldn't. I just couldn't tolerate it. They even said, I'll put it in, and I couldn't even put it in my own eye, let alone somebody else fiddling around with my eye. So no, it wasn't for me. I don't think. No, I don't think contact lenses were for me. They're a nice idea, but. I just got so used to glasses anyway, so I don't think about it. I've got reading, I've got reading glasses and my normal glasses. And so, like right now, if I'm podcasting, I'm just talking to you. I don't need to look at anything. I just take them off and fiddle with them, and I kind of relax my eyes, rest my eyes a bit.
Goodbye, 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 goodbye.
This show is part of the Pride 48 network. Find more shows over at pride48.com.
Oh dear, what's going on now? Oh, it's the Shy Life podcast.
Let's go.
I have a voice. I have a voice.
You have a voice.
You have a voice. We have a voice.
We have a voice.
Unique voices in podcasting.
UnivazPods.net.
So choose me a letter and I'll see what words I get for my last three.
Should we go for F?
Ooh, we got forum, forestry, or film. I think, other than talking about like the chat forums from the early days of the internet, where I met people and invented the Shayati sort of nickname. I mean, I spent a lot of time in forests or in woods. I always found woods exciting, even going back to when we used to visit my grandma in sort of near High Wycombe, because her garden backed on to this wood, and I was still sort of fascinated by woods. When we went to the New Forest recently, we didn't actually get to go that much in the woods. We were more on the plain where the sort of lake, where a pond was, and I still sort of, my eyes were sort of going over to it. I wonder if, unfortunately, the bit of woods we were near were behind sort of fences, so we couldn't get into it. But I always gravitate towards woods, and there are woods across the river from this village, and I was often going over there and making films. And I've talked to my mum about living in that, because she lived in that house where my gran lived when she was a girl, and considering how fascinated I was just visiting, I kind of like, what was it like living in that? But I don't think it was somewhere that she necessarily went, or certainly wasn't fascinated by in the same way as I am by woods. But and film, well, what I like. I like film a lot because I talk about it on this show all the time. Yeah. So I don't know. There's more I can say. Although when I was a kid, we didn't go to the cinema that often, Although looking at my 1990 diary, I'm finding references to, like my mum and brother went to some films in 1990 that I didn't go to. But I mean, almost by that point, I was probably going to the cinema by myself. But it was quite a rare occasion. I do remember staying at my aunt and uncle's in Cambridge around, I think it was probably around the time my brother was born, or maybe when he was ill after he was born, and I was sort of sent off for a holiday with them, and we went to see. I always feel like, because I don't know for sure, that it was before Return of the Jedi came out, and then they showed a double bill of Star Wars and Empire Strikes Back, and I was never the biggest Star Wars fan. I don't know up until that point whether I'd seen it. And I certainly didn't see Star Wars at the time. I was too young, and I don't know that I would have been interested enough in 1980 because I was interested in Doctor Who. But anyway, we went to this double bill. But unfortunately, my uncle, I think the arrangement was on the way home, rather than take us to the cinema during one of the days that I was definitely going to be there the whole time, they took me, and I had to come out halfway through because my uncle had to drive to the halfway point when my dad would pick me up and take me home. So I think I got a little way into The Empire Strikes Back, and then I had to kind of, that embarrassing thing where you have to kind of
shuffle out
in front of people and stuff. But
well, as far as films go, I, by contrast, when I look into my mum's Let's diaries, we seem to be going to the cinema every week, or there's certainly loads of times during the school holidays. But what's interesting is the films we were seeing. A lot of them were re-releases. They were Salt and the Stoner, which was like 10 years earlier. So, but they weren't just showing contemporary film. With Disney, they'd show ones that were sort of been out for years. But I certainly saw Live and Let Die was the first Bond I saw at the cinema. I was only about 4.
I think the Shy Yeti's marvelous. Oh, such a gentleman. You know what I'd really like to do is get some of that hair off him, and then knit a sweater, a Yeti hair sweater. Do you think he'd mind? I don't know.
562, 562, 562,
500 plus 6 plus 2. No, 60. Anyways, 562.
Sorry about that, Tom. I'm being shot at by a Varden. I'll turn the sound down. Shut up. You can edit this bit out.
Yeah.